It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Joanna, for inviting me. Some familiar faces in the room, some less familiar. And so let me start by talking a little bit about the context for why I'm here. Most of you are working in the secondary sector or the K through 12 sector, and I'm representing post-secondary. But I think there's some lessons that can be learned from the efforts that are going on in post-secondary, and some of those lessons apply to your context, and some of those lessons apply to your partners in your region at the post-secondary level. Let me start though with why did I turn the Sorry. There we go. Let me underline the importance of our work with a couple national data points. The first one is the percent of Americans who actually hold a college degree. This is data from the New York Times. The numbers have been disaggregated by economic quartiles. So what you're looking at are the last 40 years, and the percent of Americans who actually hold the bachelor's degree. What you can see, even if you're in the back of the room, there have been significant changes in bachelor's attainment in the upper part of the economic spectrum. The top 25% of Americans have basically double the likelihood of holding a college degree. We have not made the same gains in the bottom parts of the chart. So if you're among the 25% least wealthy Americans, your prospects of holding a college degree have changed hardly at all. We've gotten much better at access, not very good at completion when it comes to low-income students. Second chart is from the Southern Education Fund. These are data on the percent of K-12 public school children who qualify as low income. And over the last 6 or 7 years, as you're experiencing in many of your states, we've passed an important threshold where now the majority of K-12 students in the public pipeline qualify as low income. In some states, those that are in the red, the number is well above 50%. In fact, you draw a line across the U.S. roughly from D.C. to California, and almost every state south of that line has already crossed the threshold. My home state, Georgia, is over 60%. So you put these two national trends together, and it's why we all need to be here this afternoon, which is we have to do a much better job of not only getting students access to college, but helping them complete as well, especially low-income students. It's been an introduction to my home campus, Georgia State, large public university in downtown Atlanta, 53,000 students. We have 35,000 students on the Atlanta campus, which you're looking at right now. We have another 20,000 almost on our community college campuses. So as I'll talk about towards the end of my comments, we were consolidated with the largest community college in Georgia about 3.5 years ago. And so overnight we grew by about 19,000 students. We're not the flagship in Georgia. The big football powerhouse is the University of Georgia. We're not the elite technology school, Georgia Tech, which is about 1.5 miles away from us. Maybe our greatest claim to fame at Georgia State is our geography. We have the uncommon distinction of being bisected by a National Park Service historic district. The Martin Luther King District runs through campus. Ebenezer Baptist Church, where the Reverend King was head pastor, just a couple blocks away from the office I work in every morning. His birthplace, his gravesite right there in downtown Atlanta. And yet, for much of our history, we didn't live up to that legacy. So these are pictures from the Georgia State Photo Archive of what Georgia State looked like when the Reverend King was living and doing his civil rights work. We were a segregated campus into the 1960s. The sad irony there of being this institution just a couple blocks away from the Reverend King. But even much more recently than the 1960s, we were grossly underperforming overall, but especially for our students of color. These are so-called success rates as of 15 years ago. Overall, we were graduating about 30% of our students, and we were a poster child for the equity gaps. Year after year, semester after semester, the white students would outperform the students of color. The upper and middle income students would outperform the low income students. And you know what makes Georgia State's story hopefully instructive for your purposes, maybe a little bit inspirational, is that what's happened at Georgia State in the last 15 years would not immediately suggest that we would be the site of a turnaround. For one thing, we were going through significant demographic changes. When I arrived at Georgia State as a junior faculty member at a graduate school in the late 1980s, it was a majority white campus. 70% of the students at Georgia State at that point were white. We became designated an MSI, a minority serving institution, over a decade ago, and every year since, we've become more and more diverse. There's no majority population at Georgia State any longer. Largest single group are African American students, about 39%. The other demographic change that wouldn't suggest that Georgia State would be the site of a turnaround is the fact that our students have gotten a lot less well-resourced financially. The recession hit Atlanta really hard, and the families that were hit hard by the recession were not predominantly the families that sent their sons and daughters to Emory and Georgia Tech and the University of Georgia. We know from the demographics, most of those families are upper middle class and upper income families. The families losing jobs and homes were the families who sent their sons and daughters to Georgia State. And over a 5-year period, we doubled the number of Pell-eligible students, low-income students, we enroll at Georgia State from about 30% to now almost 60%. This fall at Georgia State, across all our campuses, we have enrolled 29,000 Pell-eligible students, 29,000 at one institution. Our entirely Ivy League combined this fall is enrolling about 9,800 Pell students. So we're trying to educate 3 times the number of low-income students as the entire Ivy League. It's not going to be business as usual, and it's also going to be a circumstance which fits well with some of the philosophies behind this whole organization and this meeting, which is it's going to take systematic change, right? If you have 300 low-income students, you can create a program for them. Summer program, so our colleagues up the street at Georgia Tech do just that for their incoming Pell students every summer. If you have 29,000 Pell students, you're not going to create a program for them, right? You're going to have to change the institution and the way it interacts with all students at its very core. And that's going to be a recurring theme in a couple examples I have time to share with you this afternoon. A couple other details quickly. We're not getting more selective. Our SAT scores have been going down. We've been broadening our admissions criteria over the last 15 years. And we're not doing it with more money. Our state appropriations have gone down significantly over this time period. So under these circumstances, it's easy to make excuses and to point fingers. You know, the problem's K through 12 because our SAT scores are going down. The problem is the legislature because our appropriations are going down. Instead, about a decade ago, we made a public commitment to put the mirror on ourselves and begin to ask the simple question, are we the problem? You know, 7 out of 10 students are dropping out of Georgia State with debt and no degree. Whose fault is it? Surely there are some things we're doing that are contributing to this attrition. And we got much better with the data. Even during the recession, we began to invest in data teams and data intelligence, and we put the data on ourselves. We used the data to analyze where we were creating obstacles for our students, the problems we were creating, with the simple premise that we have the ability to control those things. We can make a difference in those areas in a way that it's going to be a long-term prospect to change the will of the state legislature so they fund us at better levels and so forth. So what I'm going to do is describe a couple examples of what we saw in our own data that was so problematic and some of the steps that we took, some of which I hope are applicable to your context, to try to deal with these problems. The first example is one that I know many of your organizations are dealing with, the problem of summer melt. As recently as 4 years ago, the summer of 2015, we lost 19% of our confirmed freshman class to summer melt. Again, these are not the students we admit who don't come. That's a much larger number. These are students who we admit, they confirm they're coming, they sign up for classes, they put down a deposit, they come to orientation, and still they never show up for fall classes, 19%. So we used the data. We wanted to understand who these students were. This is what the students looked like in the summer of 2015 who were confirmed but never showed up. And you won't be surprised by the demographics. Disproportionately, these students are students of color, disproportionately low income. When we talk about the roots of equity gaps at the post-secondary level, here they're starting even before the students set foot on campus for the first day of freshman fall classes, right? They're already being weeded out disproportionately. And they're really good prospects for college, too. These are students who finished high school with B+ GPAs. Something's happening that's causing them between graduating from high school and 3 or 4 months later starting college, that's causing them to change their mind and decide not to go to college after all. And I think we all know what that something is. You know, I'll say first off that it's Georgia State. It's the bureaucracy. It's higher education. It's the 14 steps we counted that we require students to complete in the 3 months between high school graduation and the start of college, a time when, as we all know, they're no longer in contact day-to-day with their teachers and counselors from high school, but they're not yet in our care either at the post-secondary level. And so they're fending for themselves. You're all familiar with the FAFSA. I won't even go into the details of how problematic that is. if you're a first-generation low-income student trying to navigate that on your own, or even with the help of parents. But things like the verification process, wholly inequitable when it comes to economic background. Because if you are a student from middle and upper income background, your parents file a joint return, everything looks kind of normal from a traditional perspective, you're much less likely to get selected for verification. If you're being raised by your grandmother because your biological parents are not in the financial picture, you're much more likely to be targeted for a verification request. And so you literally have 17, 18-year-old first-generation students getting formal requests from the federal government in July telling them, you put on your FAFSA your grandmother as your legal guardian, we need to have written verification of her status and proof that your parents are not contributing to the finances of your family. And what we found, not surprisingly, is a subset of students were taking the request, sticking it in their pocket and saying, yes, I'm not going to college. Because you know how it works in these families. They're not going to lawyers and working on paperwork and so forth. Mom and dad are gone, grandma takes over, and that's the way it is. State of Georgia has immunization requirements. Good health policy, I'm not questioning it, but it's another differentiator when it comes to race and ethnicity and economic background. Because the middle and upper income students don't give the request a second thought. Hand it to mom or dad, your immunization records are sent in. If you're that student being raised by your grandmother, you know she doesn't have your immunization records. You don't have immunization records even if you got immunized. And if Georgia State is telling you you need your immunization records before you can start school, you're saying, I guess I'm not going to Georgia State after all. So what we did for the summer of 2016 is make some simple changes in supporting students for those 3 months between completing high school and beginning college. We started a new smartphone survey of all our admitted students the day they're admitted to Georgia State, asking them questions that we would never ask on an application. Do you have a disability? Are you working? How many hours do you need to support your family as well as pay for your education? So we can develop a much more personalized communication flow with the students. Then the portal takes the students through those 14 bureaucratic steps they need to complete in the summer. It's all color-coded, so I can see when a student has completed the step, it changes color, there are tools and resources that are available. The biggest advantage, and here's underlining the importance of data, is I, for the first time, know what's tripping up our students. Used to know that a student was engaged, and now they're no longer engaged. Now I know a student was engaged up until we asked for their immunization records, and now they're no longer engaged. So I can reach out with much more specific help. And it was that data and collecting it for the first time in Georgia State history that has changed our practice in significant ways. We offer about 38 orientation sessions during the summer for our incoming students. This summer, for the first time, we contracted with a mobile health unit, and it parked outside every one of the orientations, and it was available to provide the immunizations on the spot. Instead of sending a low-income student home and saying, oh, go get immunized for measles, like they have a Rolodex that's going to give them access to the local health network and so forth. The third thing we did, and it's been the most impactful by most measures, is we launched an AI-enhanced chatbot. This was the summer of 2016. The chatbot is an automatic texting platform. We built up a knowledge base when we launched of about 2,000 text-based answers to commonly asked questions. It's now up to about 4,000 answers in the knowledge base. The AI doesn't write the answer to the question. What happens is the students just go onto the texting platform of their phone, begin a conversation with Pounce, who's our school mascot, and when they text a question in, the AI will use algorithms to find the right response and pull it out for the student, or make a determination that there's not a correct response in the knowledge base, in which case it delivers the question to a staff person who writes the response and adds it to the knowledge base, which is why that knowledge base is constantly getting bigger and smarter. It's really simple in its initial concept. This is an actual but simple example. The student asking about whether the student is planning to park a car on campus. The answer is yes or no. If the answer is no, you say, great, I'll look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. If the answer is yes, then you give instructions about how you apply for a parking pass and so forth. But the reality and the reason why AI is so important at the foundation of this platform is this. That's what the conversation looks like when the student begins to ask questions about the FAFSA. It's this complicated process where it could be a question about any part of the FAFSA, any section of the FAFSA, questions about their own personal reality and so forth. And so it is through this AI process that students are getting these really quick responses. When we launched in June 2016, just for our incoming freshman class, we estimated we'd have 5,000 to 6,000 questions answered in the first 3 months, the time period before classes started. In those 3 months alone, just for our incoming freshman class, we had almost 200,000 questions answered. Average response time was about 6 seconds. And we saw interesting things about student behavior and need in the data we collected as a result of the chatbot. The use of the chatbot that first summer, and it remains true to this day, is higher at 1 a.m. than it is at 9 a.m. All our offices are open at 8:30 in the morning when the students are not asking the question, and we're closed down tight, at 1 a.m. when the students are up and about and answering their questions. And the student asking the question at 1 a.m. one day may well not pursue the question 2 days later when they finally are, get a chance to be on campus or call somebody and so forth. And so this chatbot is available 24/7. The other thing we saw, none of you in this room will be surprising, having worked with these students closely in many instances, but we did focus groups with the students after the first summer to say, well, how did you like using the chatbot? And the most compelling thing we heard it repeatedly, the students admitting that they asked the chatbot questions they wouldn't have asked a human being. They were embarrassed about not knowing the answer. They were embarrassed about their circumstances. If you're that student who can't get your biological father to sign the FAFSA because you haven't seen him for 2 years, the last thing you want to do is go into some stranger's office and fill out your personal history. And the students told us they liked the fact, they knew it was a bot, they liked the fact that we were putting a tool in their hand that wouldn't judge them, would allow them to ask anything they wanted to and get these immediate responses. And did it make a difference? This made a huge difference. These 3 relatively low-cost interventions that we've added to the summer period before students first enroll have served to reduce summer melt at Georgia State by 37%. Given the size of our incoming freshman class, that's over 350 students, mostly low-income first-generation students who are in their seats ready to go the first day of class, who are sitting out the college experience just a few years earlier. And because it's worked so well for our incoming students, we had a grant from Dell and ECMC to pilot last year the chatbot for all our continuing students. We obviously had to build up a much larger knowledge base to ask all the questions that an enrolled student has about college. But we've seen wonderful results, especially with regard to transactional issues. Removing holds from the account, paying balances on time, going to see an advisor in a timely fashion. The students who had access to the chatbot performed in the positive way we were hoping for at rates 30, 40, close to 50% better in consistent ways. The second example I'm going to give is this one, that in our data we saw another disturbing trend, that the average Georgia State student about 7 or 8 years ago was going through 2.5 majors, a little more than that, before they graduated. And that's a disaster if you enroll low-income students. They can't afford to have the wasted credit hours and added time to degree that is generated by bouncing between different subjects and different majors. And when we took a long, hard look at ourselves, we had to admit again that we were the problem. We, in our brochures, brag about the 150 different majors and minors and certificates we offer. This fall at Georgia State, we have 4,000 different course sections on the books. But in our infinite wisdom, we bring students into a room bigger than this one, 250 students at a time, for orientation, and basically stand up there and say, pick something, pick a major, pick 4 or 5 classes. And when they did, we got the results you could expect from a student body that is largely low-income and first generation. They would pick, and they would say, I'm going to be an accountant, and they would take 2 semesters of prerequisite courses, and they'd get into their first accounting class, and you know the answer, you know the end of the story, that 3 weeks into the class, they say, oh, that's not what I thought it'd be at all. And they would switch to some other major. And that the choice wasn't necessarily more informed than the previous one. So what we've done at Georgia State, and here's another principle that is kind of at the foundation of PASS, is to put students in strong pathways. Now, every entering student at Georgia State is in a learning community of 25 students that travel in all their first semester classes together. They build up study partnerships and friendships and a sense of community. They perform better academically. They're retained at higher rates. It's almost a no-cost program. The courses are exactly the same and exactly the same size they always were. We're just registering the students in a much more coherent fashion. But to deal with the problem of students moving between majors, what we've done is organize all these learning communities around career pathways or meta majors. So we put no pressure on Georgia State any longer for students to pick one out of 150 different majors. What we try to find is a general area of interest like business or education or STEM. We find 24 other students who share that general area of interest, so the students can not only share a sense of community, but they can actually talk about their interest in careers and majors and so forth. And then we push programming at the students all through the first semester. A faculty member from the meta major area will teach an orientation class. There'll be open houses in the departments. So the business school will have an open house in accounting and marketing and finance, meet the faculty, learn about these fields, alumni panels and so forth. So that by the end of the first semester, the students are beginning to have a fighting chance to make an informed decision about what they want to study. To help further, we've developed this portal. It scrapes job data from the Atlanta metro region every morning. And if a student says, I'm interested in nursing, they can actually look and see how many jobs are available for nurses this morning. What's the starting salary if an associate's degree? What's the starting salary if you have a bachelor's degree? But like Netflix or Amazon that say, well, you like these books or movies, you're probably going to like these others. We say, well, if you like nursing, you're going to maybe like the fact that we have degrees in health informatics and health management, radiologic technology. And here's all the job data about those as well. It's not that the only reason students choose academic pathways is because of career and income, but it's part of the equation, and too often the students are just getting that part of the equation after they're already through their studies into their senior year and then getting surprised. So this is part of every advising session with Georgia State students. And to get the faculty involved, since we have all the students in these meta majors and in these learning communities, we've created a seed grant program where faculty voluntarily apply for the grants. They get some release time with the assignment that they have to create ways in which, within their existing courses, students can learn more about the career competencies that are part of that discipline or area. So I'm a faculty member in religious studies. I've taught comparative religions at Georgia State for over 20 years. And I sincerely believe, even though anytime you look at the national rankings of the least useful majors in the country, religious studies is always number one or number two. I sincerely believe it really is valuable. I mean, you're learning critical thinking skills. You're understanding people's worldviews. You can understand motivations for behaviors. People in policy and so forth benefit from. So I believe that, but I must admit, I rarely, if ever, paused in an existing class to say to the students, this is why what you're learning is important, and this is the valuable competencies that you'll carry forward with you after graduation. Well, this program encourages just that. The example up on the screen is a real one. Our U.S. history professors got together and created a new assignment in all the U.S. history sections where the students are given a primary data set of historical data. Then they're exposed to data visualization tools like Tableau, and one of their graded assignments is to take the historical data and find a way to convey the important message in that data to an external audience. Students love it. Faculty love it too, though, because finally the students are recognizing that history is more than memorizing dates. And to get the students to not only participate in these assignments, but to record and remember them, all of the students who come into Georgia State now, at the moment they matriculate, have a career-based e-portfolio. So they can document and archive the learning that's going on. So, this structured pathway of getting the students who used to ad hoc kind of bounce between courses and hopefully find something they'd like to now, in a much more concerted way, explore areas of interest and learn about the job and career opportunities beyond graduation has a profound effect. We've reduced by about a third the number of students who change majors at Georgia State after their first year. Students finding the right fit and sticking with that fit to the point of graduation. 43% was the percent of students attempting introductory math at Georgia State and getting failing grades about a decade ago. So we've totally changed the way we deliver all introductory math courses at Georgia State. This is over 8,000 seats of math every year. We no longer have any lecture hall math classes. Every class is a hybrid adaptive class, meaning students are meeting at least part of the week in these computer labs with their classmates and instructors, each working at their own terminal on adaptive learning exercises, getting immediate feedback based upon their responses. Talk about delivering individualized attention to students. We heard already, how we have to recognize that each learner is different, but most of the pedagogy we use in the post-secondary level assumes all students are going to learn in the same way, at the same pace. In these classes, students who are a little slower get more foundational questions so they don't fall behind. lose the concepts of the class and have everybody move beyond them. The more advanced students get more advanced questions. Every hour, students in one of these labs are getting about 100 bits of personalized feedback. So they're getting this immediate feedback about doing math instead of listening to somebody talk about doing math. Same requirements for passing, and with better results, by the way, in next level math and STEM classes. Well, we're passing about 1,300 more students every year through math in their first attempt, rather than multiple attempts. And because it's worked so well in math, we've had the faculty in the social sciences come forward and on their own have put forward an initiative where we're converting 15,000 seats a year of economics, political science, and psychology to adapt to the courses as well. Here there's a lesson in patience. With any of these transformative changes, the kind of systematic change that we're talking about, you have to give it some time. And so often our knee-jerk reaction is to try something, say it doesn't work, and move on to the next thing. In the case of this social science experiment, which is funded in part by the Gates Foundation, so we had a 3-year period where we were going to implement. The first year results were not encouraging. In micro and macroeconomics, in the first year, the students in the face-to-face traditional classes performed better than the students in the new hybrid adaptive classes. But we went back and looked at the data and tweaked it and made changes and found out which sections were working well and which not so well in the adaptive courses. And now, for both micro and macroeconomics, the students in the adaptive sections are outperforming the students in the traditional sections. And for the sections we're not changing with pedagogy, we have one of the largest near-peer tutoring programs in the country, where we pull students out who are already on work study and other kind of aid programs. We look at the data to find students who have succeeded in courses that others fail in. If you have a student who aced organic chemistry, don't have their work study assignment answering phones at some front desk. Put them to use in that context. Have them share their knowledge with others. These students now are pulled out of their work assignments. We pay them to go through training. We pay them to sit in every section of the course they've already passed, so they get integrated into the course and get to know the students. And they do 3 group tutoring sessions every week. And you can see the results. So almost half a letter grade better performance. The interesting thing in the data here is the students who go to these near-peer tutoring sessions are almost inversely related to the students who show up for faculty office hours. There are social and cultural barriers to a new first-generation low-income student knocking on a faculty member's door and saying, I don't understand what you're saying. But they're much more likely to go to a near-peer who has similar background and can perhaps in many cases explain things in other ways. My final example is probably the one we're most noted for, but it also fits well with the POS principles of using data and analytics to identify problems early on. So we were losing almost 6,000 a year to drop out as recently as about 7-8 years ago. And when I was asked why these students were dropping out, my honest answer was, I don't know. Because students don't sign paperwork, don't fill out any explanation when they drop out of college, right? They just stop re-enrolling. They're enrolled one semester and they don't come back again. And so there's kind of this silent attrition going on a day-to-day basis. So what we did in 2011 was engage in a big data project, 2.5 million Georgia State grades, 140,000 student records, to try to see if we could identify in the data any behaviors which had a statistically significant correlation to students dropping and flunking out of university. What do students do 6 months or 12 months or 24 months before they drop out that might tip us off that they're going to leave the university? So hopefully we'll have the chance to respond. We thought we would find a few dozen behaviors that were statistically significant in predicting attrition. We found 800. And so what Georgia State has been doing for over 7 years now is tracking every single student every night for every one of those 800 risk factors. As we update our information systems every night, we're looking for those behaviors. If one's identified, it's flagged, and the next morning a staff person is given the task of within 48 hours reaching out to that student with some kind of intervention. My message to you about the kind of things that we're flagging and that are most important to track is that most of these things are common sense behaviors that we should have been tracking all along at the post-secondary level. Paying attention to the courses students sign up for instead of assuming that students can navigate these complex curriculum systems themselves. We found every year about 3,000 instances where students sign up for the wrong class. A class they're not prepared to take, a class in the wrong order, or a class that's not going to get them any closer to graduation because it doesn't meet requirements. Now this system is tracking all those behaviors. We've seen in the earliest signs of academic performance indicators that a student is at risk. The first grade a student gets in his or her major, highly predictive of their chances of graduating on time, in ways that you might not initially expect. Now, we all know that if a student fails a class, that puts them at risk. But what we've seen is if a student's getting a C in the first class that they take in their chosen major, that indicates that there are problems down the road. These are actual data from Georgia State. A political science major who gets an A or B in the first political science class, graduating from Georgia State on time at above a 70% clip, which is great for us. A student who gets a C in the first political science class and goes on to do a political science major is graduating on time at a 25% clip. But what have we done with that C student for the last generation? Nothing. We pass them on and sit back and wait for 75% of them to begin to fail. And once they collect some D's and F's in their upper level coursework, then we intervene. Incredibly backward and incredibly destructive, especially for low-income students who have a limited amount of eligibility for aid programs and so forth to get them to the point of graduation. Looking at these early warning signs, the early grades in math and English disproportionately influential in how students will do in later courses. Whether the students are attempting sufficient numbers of hours. Students who start out part-time, very difficult to get them to graduate, especially on time. The trick here is doing all this at scale. Over the last 12 months, we've had over 60,000 meetings, one-on-one with our students that are prompted by alerts coming out of the platform. Didn't correct 60,000 problems, but I can say just a few years ago, these were 60,000 issues that were going completely undiagnosed by Georgia State. Students were signing up for the wrong classes, they were underperforming prerequisites, nobody was lifting a finger. Now we're finally taking some responsibility. We're guiding students through this bureaucracy that we've created. As soon as we launched this predictive analytics platform in summer of 2012, we saw a significant uptick in overall retention rates. The biggest gains were not for our traditional freshmen. They were for our military learners, or adult learners, or part-time students. All the students who tend to sail under the radar screen are now getting tracked for 800 risk factors every day and getting these proactive interventions, and it's making a big difference. It's also made a difference, a significant one, in average time to degree. So we haven't lowered any graduation requirements since we launched this platform, but the average Georgia State bachelor student is taking over half a semester less time to graduate, because they're finding the right major the first time, they're getting through math after one attempt rather than after three, they're registered for the right classes. If you think that doesn't matter for low-income students in particular, that drop in half a semester off the average time to a bachelor's degree translates into savings of $18 million for this year's graduating class compared to the graduating class the year before. And if you're part of the pushback to the use of predictive analytics that says the problem with predictive analytics is it's funneling students into the easiest majors and easiest courses and so forth. We heard that from some of our faculty before we launched. Here's the evidence to the contrary. We've been doing this for 7 years. We've had right around 500,000 interventions with students over that time period. Our two fastest growing majors are biology and computer science, and every year since we've had the system in place, we've set new records for the number of STEM degrees we're conferring. Not because we have a lot more students declaring STEM majors, but because we have a lot fewer students declaring STEM majors and wiping out after a couple semesters. What we found is, in the past we'd sit by passively while a student who says, I'm pre-med, struggles in calculus, fails organic chemistry, and then they either dropped out or we're sitting down with them a year later saying, pick another major because you failed all the required courses. Now we have alerts going off as early as 3 or 4 weeks into the semester. So what might have been a D on the midterm, maybe it becomes a B minus, and by the end of the semester it's a B and they're good to go for the next semester. So in conclusion, I'm going to pull together the aggregate impacts of kind of these systematic changes where the student experience is significantly different from the moment they first encountered Georgia State. One has been a change in the profile of the university. This was campus a little over a year ago. You'll recognize the gentleman on the far right there, perhaps. But the interesting thing about Bill Gates' visit is we did not invite him. He was giving a keynote at the World Congress Center in downtown Atlanta on World Health. And like 3 weeks before, we get a call from his people, the Gates Foundation people, saying, Bill's going to be in town. He's been reading about what you've been doing with data and technology to help low-income students. Would you mind if he dropped by for a few hours? We'll make an exception just this once in a while. But it wasn't a ceremonial visit. He spent about 3 hours on campus, and all he wanted to do was talk about all the programs that I'm describing. He played with the chatbot. He looked at the predictive analytics. He met with some of our first-generation students. And so that's important for this institution that has a really spotty history to be recognized in that sort of way from somebody like Bill Gates. I had the honor of speaking twice at the White House. President Obama cited some of our programs, and we got an award and so forth. It's been a little quieter over the last 2.5 years. I don't know if anything's changed in D.C. And I stopped calling for some reason. But building on a point that was made earlier this afternoon, Tina said this at lunch, this is not a divisive issue politically, right? This is one of the few unifying issues politically. And I will say, all joking aside, that yes, the Obama administration was very supportive of what we were doing, but when I was invited to testify before the Senate, it was at the invitation of the Republican side of the aisle. When Betsy DeVos was confirmed as Secretary of Education, her second visit to a post-secondary school was to Georgia State. Whether you're about social justice and equity, or whether you're about tax base and workforce and so forth, this is a win-win situation. It's also a win-win situation for many of our institutions financially. So I know this works different in K through 12, especially public K through 12. But every student we hold on to at Georgia State, that not only does it mean something significant morally, it also means something from a fiscal perspective. Every 1% we improve our retention rates at Georgia State is worth about $3 million a year in added tuition and fee revenues. We haven't improved our rates by 1%. We've improved them by 23 percentage points. So we're talking about $60 to $70 million of additional revenue coming into the university annually. And doing it is because of this. Despite all those demographic shifts that I started off describing this afternoon, the doubling of the number of non-white students, the doubling of the low-income students, we're graduating 3,000 more students every year from Georgia State than we were just 7 or 8 years ago, a 73% increase. But look where the gains have come from predominantly. They're 73% overall, but up over 120% for our African American students, almost 190% for our Hispanic and our low-income students. Not because any one of these programs is targeted by race, ethnicity, or income level. Every time we've seen a problem, we've just changed the way we behave for all students. But not surprisingly, at least in retrospect, the students who benefit the most from a systematic change are the students who are tripped up the most by the bad and unfriendly systems we had in place beforehand. And when you translate those kind of gains into graduation rates, this is what you see. That we haven't had incremental, we've had exponential improvements in our graduation rates. We've more than doubled our graduation rate for our African American students. We've almost tripled it now for our Hispanic students. We've more than tripled it for our African American male students. And for 5 years in a row now, our low income, meaning our Pell students, our African American, and our Hispanic students have all graduated at or above the rate of the student body overall. So race, ethnicity, income are no longer predictors of who's going to be successful at Georgia State. This institution in the shadow of the Martin Luther King District segregated into the 1960s and grossly underperforming for our students of color as recently as a decade ago. Now, for 6 years in a row, has conferred more bachelor's degrees to African American students than any other college or university in the U.S. And isn't that a much better and more fitting testimony to our geography there in the Martin Luther King District than where we were a decade ago? Last bit of information here. When I present, one of the questions I get most often is, yeah, it worked at Georgia State, but would these same sorts of systematic database changes work at other institutions? Well, the state of Georgia handed us a wonderful test case for that, because 3.5 years ago, Georgia State was given, in effect, the largest community college in the state of Georgia to run. It was grossly underperforming at the time. And what we've been doing over the last 3 years is rolling out these same programs. The predictive analytics, the proactive advising, the learning communities, the adaptive math. We haven't had the chance to roll out and scale all of these programs yet, but you can see the results here. Here are the iPad's 3-year graduation rates. For the decade before before consolidation, which is what the state of Georgia called the merger, the graduation rates at Perimeter College never topped 9%. They topped 9% every year since then and are at 19% now. We've basically tripled the graduation rate since the two institutions were brought together. And the State Farm Foundation asked an interesting question about 2.5 years ago. They said, if we give you some money to, at one of the Perimeter College campuses, expand all of these programs immediately so that the students coming in, this would have been the class coming in 2+ years ago to Perimeter College, have the benefits of the learning communities and the analytics and the added advising and all the outreach and the better math instruction and so forth. We want to see what the results would be, because that might inform what we do in future, given not only at Georgia State but across the nation. Well, here are the results. And we took a group of students at one of the campuses in South DeKalb County, which is an underperforming area in the metro Atlanta area. 100% of these students were underrepresented minorities. 100% of them were Pell eligible 2 years, not 3 years, into their time at Georgia State. 2 years into their time in their associate degree programs. 85% of the students successfully completed associate degrees. So I think the importance of Georgia State's story, I think for this group and others, is, yeah, there are details there I hope we can pick up and apply and use, and we're going to talk about in just a second. But the other important thing is to kind of change our mindset. I think the easy way to put this is, you have a lot more power in your hands than maybe you've given yourself credit for. Because we read all these reports, and I don't doubt them, that the beginnings of the equity gaps start in pre-K, where they're evident in 3rd grade reading scores, or they're in 8th grade math scores. And what we might assume from that is that, therefore, by the time we get these students, the equity gaps, the discrepancies between success rates and so forth are written in stone. And why Georgia State and other institutions that are coming along like us are so important is to change that mindset, to recognize that we have the ability, through doing our jobs well, through using data intelligently, through collaborating across sectors, through scaling change so that it benefits all students, not just a small subset of the students we serve. We have the ability to change that reality, to eliminate those equity gaps, and finally deliver on the promise that we so offer to the families and the students we serve. So thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. But more, thank you for the good work.